Hey everyone, welcome back to the Power Baseball League. Last week we talked about relationships and your cascading behavior and mapping and all of that fun stuff. And this week we want to touch on another topic that can have huge implications and has lots going on, but is very easy to forget or leave to the last minute. So now here we are, about to deliver our Power Baseball League solution, and we're like, oops, didn't talk about security. So we're not doing best practices here, but we kind of want to walk you through the process to set up a security role and some things to think about. Obviously, lots of great resources around security already available that you can check out, but we'll give you a few tips. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
I feel like we need that like ring, ring, ring music when you introduce it and say the word security, because I feel like everybody's terrified of security, and for good reason.
Sure.
It's like it's complicated, and that's just it. It's complicated and it's scary. And I still remember the first time getting started with CRM was like 4.0 days, and our partner at the time, who was implementing the organization I was working for, sat me down and was like, okay, we're gonna go through all the security and here's how the security matrix work. And they opened it up, and I remember looking at him thinking, are you crazy? Like this is insane. There's all these little dots and they all have different things in them, and I can't imagine the day that I'll ever understand it. And I'm not sure that day has fully arrived, because there's always something that I'm looking here and I'm like, oh, right, a pen and a pen too. I got to keep that straight. Like little things like that continuously, if you're not like anything else, if you're not looking at it every day, it can be a challenge. So.
For sure, 100%. I'm going to back up for 1 second. What we did before this call is in our solution, we went ahead and added an existing security role here. So that's what you can see that we're looking at, and we're going to make a copy of this and edit it. But you did bring up a great point about these, about all these little circles that are very confusing. So I quickly wanted to mention that we have a pretty cool matrix going on here. So down one side, we have the entity you're controlling permissions for. Across the top, we're talking about what that permission is. And then the dots symbolize the kind of permission that you're going to get and the kind of level of that permission. So that's kind of how you understand what's going on here. But completely agree, like you said, Malcolm, there's so much going on here. It takes time. You're going to have to play with it, have your users test it, and don't feel bad if you need to come back and review. And I'll also mention down at the bottom, we have miscellaneous privileges, and they have these across every tab. So that's a good thing to make sure you don't forget to check. Anyways, Malcolm, talk me through what we want to do to set up our new security role.
Yeah, so the other thing I think we should probably call out is, just as a reminder, if you've been following along, you'll remember that a couple of weeks ago we ran into an issue, I believe it was around some of the marketing functionality, marketing lists, where we uncovered that we didn't have, when we set up the environment, we didn't have the
Dynamics apps.
Yeah, thank you, the Dynamics apps. And so because of that, we didn't have some of the features that we expected to have. Yep. And we ran into that again today when we opened up the security roles. Not so much the features, but when we looked at the security roles, the list that you would traditionally see if you're coming from that space of the Dynamics apps, it looks far more extensive than what you're seeing, right? You'll see salesperson and VP of sales and marketing lead and stuff like that. None of that exists when you're dealing with just a strictly Dataverse environment. So we grabbed the basic user that you can see on there, and we're gonna work with that one. One of the good or effective practices to follow is when you're starting to deal with security roles, you don't have to open up a brand new one and build it from scratch. Take one that's already there and tailor it as you need to, either enhancing security or decreasing security. But always make a copy of it, because you never know when you might want to revert back. It's also, because it's so complex, it's also easy to get to a place where all of a sudden you don't remember what you changed and when and to what level, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I just got to scrap this and go back to the start. And in doing so, if you've overwritten the original rule, you're going to lose the ability to do that. So as you saw Kylie just do, a quick copy under the actions, you copy a role, rename it, and it's going to open that new role up for you. And when you do, then you can close down the original one, keep that safe, and work in your newly created role. That way, if you mess it up, frankly, if you mess it up bad enough and you need to start from scratch, you can get rid of that role, copy it again, and away you go. So Kylie's got our new PBL admin user, or security role rather, queued up. So what we're going to do is we're going to just touch on a couple of key features. We're not going to go into depth because, as you saw, if you click onto that core records, Kylie, there's all of these dots. You're going to want to think through everything, right? Who's got access? What do they need access to? What permissions should they have? Can they delete? Can they create? Can they read? Can they, and not only can they do those things, but at what level? So Kylie referenced the key at the bottom. So is it just their own records that they can see? Should they see business unit or parent-child business units, meaning their own unit and any units underneath them? Can they see all data in the whole organization? So lots of considerations to make. And again, this is why when I first got introduced to this, when I was brand new to the world of Dynamics and this whole concept, it was terrifying because there's a lot of moving parts involved here. But if you just break it into chunks like everything else, just break it down into smaller component pieces, it's actually not that complicated. And to Kylie's point, it's actually a really cool matrix that you're dealing with here. So for the purposes of Power Baseball League, we're just going to say our PBL admin needs full access to accounts and contacts. And so we're going to go ahead and give them, by full access, we mean we want them to have the ability to create, to read, write, append to, do all these things, assign and share everything. The one catch in that respect, though, is that we maybe don't want them the ability to delete, because it's important to understand that when you delete a record, if you're deleting an account or you're deleting a contact, they're gone, right? The record is gone. So you may want to use some heavy discretion around who gets the ability to delete. I've seen organizations hand it out pretty freely. I've seen organizations say only our system admin is ever going to have that ability, and it's got to go through an approval process in order to be able to delete a record. I think that's a great way to go about it, because again, when you delete something, you don't want to accidentally delete something and want it back, because when it's gone, it's gone.
And remember, they can always deactivate, right? They don't have to always completely remove it, just deactivate it and get it out of the view. I did want to quickly show that I was clicking here on the row to change all of the permissions at once. You can, if you really enjoy clicking, do the circle, right, to change through all the levels if you wanted to, which can be good because I don't need everything in this row to necessarily be the same. Maybe I want them to be able to read everything, but can only create things assigned to themselves, right? So I do have that flexibility, and I can do the same for columns. So this is really great for delete. If you want to say, I'm getting rid of all delete, you can do it quickly like that. And, you could walk through all of the tabs to clean it up.
Awesome. The other thing that I wanted to say, and I think it may have escaped me, it did. So we'll circle back to that if it comes back to me.
We'll circle back.
For the purposes of this, again, we're just tackling the two that we know that they need full access to, right? So account and contact. That's it for starters. Now, the other thing we want to call out, and I think Kylie's going to walk us through, is you may recall from earlier in this season, I guess we'll call it, we talked about the creation of some of our custom tables, right? We had a few tables that were not available out of the box, so we added them in. Now, it's important to understand that you have to give people permissions to that, because we added them in as admins and they're going to show up in the security role matrix, but general users, basic users, whatever the security role might be out of the box, is not going to have access to that. So Kylie can walk us through how to update that.
Yeah, perfect. So I just popped over here to the custom entities tab, and then I can just find the entities that we created. Here's our registration, right? And I want to give people full access to that, but I want to remove delete. You'll notice the hover over to will tell you what privilege you're looking at, which is helpful when you can't see the header bar. We also created the season, which I think we might not need our admin. Well, we might need our admin to create seasons, but we might have like the coaches who wouldn't be able to create seasons and would just be able to view them. And then any other entities that we created, we would also see here. And one other tip that I wanted to share quickly, or what I would usually recommend, is usually we create like a base role, or so we might call this PBL basic access or something like that, that would have the access that everyone has. And then we could create a layer on top of that of an additional role with just kind of extra permissions, like the delete that we talked about, or exporting the data, or maybe creating these seasons, things like that, that we know only a smaller group of users are going to use, so that you can just layer that on top and kind of be able to quickly look at a user and understand what permissions they have.
And when doing so, would you copy that base role and then add those permissions into the enhanced role, or would you create a new role just with those, like a blank role just with the permissions that you're referring to?
Yeah, that's a great call out. Usually what I would do is create a fully blank role. So people are going to have one role that's a copy of this basic user role or something like that, with all the detailed permissions that they need. And then there would be an additional role that's completely blank except for a few permissions that they need on top of that. Why I recommend that is because if you need to make a change, so say we add an additional custom entity, I want to make that change in one place. I don't want to be having to update multiple security roles and worry about how those roles layer on top of each other. That's just too much work. Yeah. And remember that our permissions are always going to be cumulative, and you'll get the most access out of all of them. So it's okay for people to have multiple roles, just understand that they'll be getting all of that access combined.
Right.
And you'll see as we scroll through here, there's so many permissions we didn't talk about. A lot of these things, the reason we recommend you copy a role is because there's things like make sure they have access to read the team. These are things that when you're building out this role, you're not going to think of that, right? So that's information that is helpful to copy, and then you can just remove things that you don't want them to have. And so the one I mentioned quickly was like export to Excel, and a lot of organizations, you don't want your users to be able to export your data. Maybe you have sensitive data in there that they can view, but you don't want them to be able to save it and like take it with them somewhere, right? So that's something you might want to review. So when you're reviewing this and removing your delete, we just encourage you to also spend some time at these other privileges here and see if there's anything that sounds a little bit, could be troublesome. Then maybe you want to go ahead and remove it, like bulk edit, things like that.
I did remember that other item that I wanted to talk about. I actually have two now. So the first one was when you were looking at the core records and we were talking through account and contact, there was an item that you clicked, and I believe it was, I don't actually remember what it was now, but when you clicked it, it didn't give you the little pie, medium pie, as people often refer to it. It just went from full to nothing, right? Or from nothing to full, and vice versa. Yeah, that's it right there, connection rule. And so that's what happens when you set up a new table in the system. You have the ability to set that, whether it's I forget. Maybe you remember, Kylie.
User owned. If it's user owned, then you're going to have all the slices of the pie because it has an owner. And if it's organization owned, then it doesn't have an owner. So you either have it or you do not have it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I couldn't remember that owned piece. That was the name of it. So that's an important one, and you'll uncover that, like that connection rule. It's either full or none at all. They either have it or they don't. The other thing that I want to just underscore on all of this is, like everything else, test, and don't underestimate or devalue the value of testing this. So you often hear people say, well, let's send people in to try and break the system. And security is one of the things that they should be trying to get, essentially get in there and do things that they shouldn't. So if a user shouldn't have the ability to delete, they should go in and explicitly test that. Even if you've removed the ability in the role, have them test it, because there are some weird things in some connections between elements on these roles. You see all these lines. Sometimes there's things like qualifying a lead depends on security privileges in here that you may not necessarily think about. And you may not even see when you look at the role and have any indication that it has any tie to the ability to qualify a lead. So currency, for example, you need access to currency to be able to do that, for example. That used to be the case. Maybe it's not today, but that used to be one of the weird gotchas that people would not necessarily realize that. And so you're looking at this role thinking, no, they have the ability to see leads and opportunities and the account contact, they should have that ability. But because they don't have the right permission in another area, it's going to prevent their ability to move on. Those are things you're going to want to test. Have people go in explicitly to try and figure out what they can and can't do, and cross-reference that with what your expectations are as an organization or as an admin. Yes, we want our users to be able to do these things, or, oh, hey, they were able to do this. We don't want them to do that. Let's figure out how to make sure that we prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. I think sometimes we have this idea of like security by obscurity, right? If I don't train them on it, or if I hide a field, then it'll be fine and they can't make a mistake. But users will find ways to get around stuff. You won't know how they got there, but somehow they're able to do things that you didn't expect them to be able to do. So it's really important to kind of get this locked down and combine your security role with your other security things that I think we already talked about, like field level security and form security and all of those fun things that all kind of combine together to make a comprehensive security strategy.
Yes, well said. Well said. Well, that's about it. That's all we had. We, again, super high level, like we've been trying to keep most things, right? Trying to keep it short and sweet. Wanted to give you a high level overview of what the security matrix look like, some of the key considerations, but you'll want to do some more reading like everything else. Do as much reading as you can. There's lots of other resources out there. So make sure you search for those and give security its thought, because it really is, especially in this day and age, it is a critical element to the implementation itself.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.